Hello, my name is Shannon, and welcome to my very first Booktube video. A year or two ago, I decided that I really wanted to spend more time reading and learn more about the books that I was reading, about my favorite authors. So I started on a little project where I was listening to literary podcasts. I was hoping to attend some literary roundtable lectures, and then I found Booktube. I didn't even know it existed, and I've been watching it for a few months now, and I've really been impressed with all of the books that people are reading. Some I've never heard before, and some that I have, and it's been really wonderful watching all of BookTube talk about books and reading. The reason I'm starting this channel is I am bursting to talk about books. Every time I read something that I absolutely love, I just want to talk about it. Or even if I read something that I absolutely hate, I want to blab about it. And there are people in my life that I can talk to, but sometimes it's just not convenient. Everyone is really busy with their lives and work and raising kids, and sometimes you actually have to carve out time in order to talk about these things. And, with BookTube, I can just sit down wherever and whenever I want and talk about books with people. Another reason is that I really enjoy hearing about other people's point of view, especially with books that I've read over and over. Sometimes just people come up with the most amazing thoughts about these stories that never would have entered into my head. We all have, different experiences with life. We have different ages and different backgrounds. And so just hearing other people's thoughts on the same story has really been fascinating. I would also love to expand my genres and expand the authors that I read in my favorite genres. And I think BookTube can help with that because everybody seems to have just the most amazing range of genres that you are all reading. Another thing is BookTube, from what I can tell from the little while that I've been watching it, it seems like a very young crowd. And I haven't quite found as many people on BookTube in my current stage of life. There are a few, and I have found a couple of you. Having a little bit of an older perspective on some things can be helpful. And so I think that that is something that I personally can bring to BookTube. I read fiction and nonfiction pretty much equally. Throughout my reading years, I go through phases. When I tell you Oprah's book club had me in a chokehold in the 90s, I am not kidding. And a lot of those books that Oprah chose in the 90s when she started her book club were really emotionally intensive. They took a lot out of you. They were wonderful books. And at that time in the 90s, I was all about it. Now my fiction kind of has switched to where I want something a little bit lighter, a little bit easier to read, not necessarily so exhausting. I may go back to those deeper books at some point, but currently my fiction is not as heavy. I like things a little bit lighter. And as for nonfiction, I love nonfiction. And I'm generally a historical biography kind of girl. And I'm hoping BookTube will help me expand my nonfiction. I've been reading a lot of social science books. I've been reading a lot of just general history, not necessarily historical biography. And I also read a lot of productivity. I am in a pretty demanding industry, and maximizing my time at work and at home is something that's really important to me. So I do read a lot of those nonfiction books as well. Currently, I am on a classics kick. I have always loved the classics and have been reading the classics since I was a teenager. My favorite authors being mainly female British authors from the 18th and 19th centuries. But I am expanding my classics, and I am hoping to read more American classic authors, more male authors in the classics. Now, I don't plan on this channel being a classics channel, but there will be a heavy dose of the classics. And I do read a lot of Jane Austen. I'm sorry, I know that some people out there are just not fans of Jane Austen, but to me, she is just so smart. And the more that I have delved deep into those novels, you really can see how smart she was and how funny she was. And I think it was Virginia Woolf that said that Jane Austen was the hardest author to catch in the act of greatness. And I really do believe that as I continually read more about her family, about what she was writing. I do read a lot of other fiction, but the classics do have a special place in my heart. I also read a lot of theater. I studied theater in college. I was a performer for many years, so you will see a pretty decent dose of current and older plays. I do like to attend theater performances, and I generally try to read the play before I actually see it. And so I will be talking a little bit about theater on this channel. The only genre of fiction that I tend to shy away from is science fiction, fantasy, and dystopian. I've just never been drawn to those. However, maybe you all can change my mind and I can start reading a little bit more fantasy and dystopian. I'm not so sure about sci-fi, but I'll try. I might also talk about some adaptations of my favorite books. We all know the huge argument about the best version of Pride and Prejudice. Okay? I'm not going to tell you my favorite, but I'm sure you're guessing by my age which one is my favorite. So I might talk about adaptations here on this channel, which obviously is not a book review, but I absolutely love reading my favorite classic books and watching the adaptations. It's just one of my favorite things to do, so I hope that I can share that with you. I plan on this channel being a relaxing outlet for me. I probably won't be reading the latest and greatest, most immediate releases. I just don't have the time. I won't be able to read 100 books a year. I know that there are some of you out there in Booktube that can do that, and unfortunately, that is just something I do not have the time for as much as I would love to. I plan to put out as much content as I can and read as much as I can. I'm hoping to get through the tons of books that I already own and have not read, have been sitting on my shelves for years. I don't want this to be stressful for me. And this isn't my job, so I will do my best to upload as much content as I can in the time that I have. I have some goals for my literary journey, and I mentioned that I've already been listening to some podcasts, I've been watching YouTube, I've been attending some lectures, and I have signed up for a course over the summer. It's an online course. I can, work on it when I have the time, and I'm very much looking forward to that. It is a course on Jane Austen, so spoiler, be prepared for some Jane Austen content in between April and July, which is when the course is. I'm really, really excited about taking that course. So I apologize in advance for those of you who are not huge Jane Austen fans, but maybe I can bring something to the table that will make you, if not love her, make you understand her better. I'm also going to be doing a reading challenge this year. The Massachusetts Center for the Book is doing a 2024 reading challenge. Obviously, it started in January, and I have already read a couple of books, but I will do a separate video on at least the rest of the year in case you want to follow along for the prompts. And I think these prompts are really, really helpful for me to actually look in my collection to see what I have and actually read what I own. I'm very much a mood reader, and I'm hoping that this reading challenge will help me read more books that I wouldn't necessarily read because I just wasn't in the mood for them. Another goal for my literary journey is that I want to read more children's books that I loved growing up, maybe even some newer children's books. Lastly, another one of my goals, at least for this year and maybe next year, is to go through my collection and reread and pass along a lot of my books. I have been carting around so many books over the years, and I've obviously kept these books for a reason, but I've never reread them. I've had them for many, many years. They've been sitting on my shelves. They've followed me around for 6 or 7 moves. I obviously kept them for a reason, so I would like to reread them. And if I determine that, yes, these should be kept, I will keep them in my collection. And if I decide, okay, I reread it, I will probably never reread it again, I'll pass it along. Let's talk about what I'm currently reading. First, we have a biography about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and this is by Jane Sharon de Hart. Now, this is a chunker. It is very heavy. I could probably knock someone out with this book. Apologies if you see me look down, but I'm looking at my notes. So I started to read this in 2021. I got probably, I don't know, maybe like that much through it. And I put it down for whatever reason, who the heck knows. Maybe I got distracted by a shiny new book and I stopped reading it. And it was a little difficult with all of talking about all of her cases. I hadn't even gotten to the point where she was nominated to the Supreme Court. I work in the legal industry, so all of the legal jargon was not unfamiliar for me. And I can see that it would be difficult for someone who is not in the legal industry to get through all of the legal jargon. This book spends a lot of time on her cases, which is important because that is what brought her to where she was when she got nominated to the Supreme Court. It does talk a little bit about her life. It begins with her childhood in Brooklyn, moves on to when she goes to Harvard and Columbia Law Schools. She became one of the first female law professors in the country. I think she taught at Rutgers. She then became the director of ACLU's Women's Rights Project, arguing anti-sex discrimination cases before the Supreme Court. And not just for women, for men too. One of her most famous cases was a sex discrimination case on behalf of a man. So she was doing it for both sides. She became a federal judge and finally nominated in 1993 to the Supreme Court. Like I said, I started this in 2021. I never finished it. I picked it up early this year and realized that I was never going to get through it if I read it. So I'm actually now listening to it on audiobook, something I've never done before. So this is actually my first audiobook. I prefer a physical copy of a book. I prefer to read, but I decided that because some of the information here was so dense, especially because I spent so much time on the legal cases, that the audiobook would be helpful. And it actually has been really, really helpful. I have about 5 hours left of the audiobook, and I'm really glad that I decided to do that. So I will let you all know when I finish this. The next thing I'm reading is Angela's Ashes. And this copy is a little beat up because I have had this book since the 90s when it was published. I read it in the 90s. And so this is actually covering 2 of my goals. It's part of the reading challenge. So this is my March pick for the reading challenge I mentioned. And like I said, I'll have a separate video on the reading challenge so you can know the prompt of what this was. And then this is also one of those books that I wanted to reread and pass along. This is a memoir about Frank McCourt's childhood, starting out in Depression era New York, and then moving to the slums of Limerick, Ireland, and where he had a pretty miserable childhood. Alcoholic father, not a whole lot of food, kind of cruel relatives, stuff like that. I vaguely remember there being some sort of mini scandal where he admitted to making something up in the book. Not the whole thing, but maybe an incident. I don't remember, and when I do a review of this, I will try to research that and see what that was. The next item that I'm reading, which is a digital copy, so I'll put something over here, is Gaudy Night by Dorothy L. Sayers. And I chose Gaudy Night to read because I would like to get a little bit more mystery into my repertoire. and I figured the old school detective novel might do the trick. I've never read Dorothy Sayers. From what I understand, she has earned a place with some of the best detective writers. Gaudy Night is part of the Lord Peter Wimsey series, and this one is mainly about Harriet Vane, who I guess is a love interest. I don't know much about the Lord Peter Wimsey series, and if I like this one, I will go back and read more. I'm only on chapter 5, and so far, what has happened, Harriet has visited her old Oxford college for a reunion and is now brought into some strange harassment happening on the college grounds. So I don't know much more than that. And when I finish it, I will let you all know. And if I plan on reading more Dorothy L. Sayers. Next up is the Daily Stoic. 366 Meditations on Wisdom, Perseverance, and the Art of Living by Ryan Holiday and Stephen Hanselman. Every day I read one page with my coffee, and gives the daily insights by the old Stoics on perception, action, will. It'll give the old Stoic quote, and then they'll give a modern day interpretation. And so far it's been pretty interesting, and I have been pretty consistent with it. Most of the time, the things don't resonate with me, but there are a couple that do. I once was very, very stressed out about something, and lo and behold, the next morning, the quote for that day just happened to address the type of stressful situation that I was in. Not every quote is going to resonate with you at any given time. So I figure maybe I'll read this every year and see what resonates and see what doesn't. And it may change over time. I probably won't finish this till the end of the year because it's just one a day. The last thing I'm reading is Jane Austen's Letters, 4th edition, collected by Deirdre Le Faye. Now, this is a chunky girl, and I didn't think I would actually like this. First of all, it's such an invasion of privacy. I'm sure no one actually ever expects that their letters are going to be read like 200 years later. And we know that Cassandra, Jane Austen's sister, burned a lot of her letters, probably the more emotional and heartfelt letters that she wrote to her sister. So the ones that we're getting, the ones that survived, the ones that were filtered through the family and inherited are the light and fluffy and funny ones talking about daily things, which is why I'm sure people think that Jane Austen is just some little flutter budget or something. It's just Cassandra burned all of the letters where she really gave her thoughts and hopes and dreams to her sister. What we do have is really, really interesting. It gives such an interesting aspect into the daily life of someone in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And Jane she's a smart ass. She is a smart ass. She is very funny. This also has an index in the backs for each letter. So Deirdre Le Faye references the provenance of the letter. A lot of them were inherited by Jane's niece, Fanny Knight, and then inherited by Fanny's son. And then he might have sold some because she mentions a bunch of auctions. But basically, she goes down the list where the letter came from. I look forward to reading a letter every morning with my coffee. All right, that is it. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope that I will see you back here. Bye.